Welcome to Mental Health First Aid. We have a show today that's going to be very interesting. We're going to get into the real basics of mental health first aid. There are 5 different portions of the curriculum that we have, and one of the portions is in on anxiety. Easily said. We have Dr. Joann Wright here, who is going to be talking to us about the anxiety, and your specialty is with anxiety, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. I'm the Director of Clinical Training and Anxiety Services at Linden Oaks.
Oh, very nice.
Okay.
How long have you been doing it?
I have been doing it not at Linden Oaks for 17 years, but at Linden Oaks for 3.
So always with anxiety, or just sort of in the realm of anxiety?
I'm a generalist, so I work with a number of mental health issues, but now specializing in anxiety. We have a intensive outpatient program at Linden Oaks specializing in anxiety services.
You know, talking about anxiety and just trying to figure out the different aspects of it, what is anxiety? Is it a bad thing, a good thing?
Well, that's a really great question because it's a little bit of both. We need anxiety as a motivator. Take, for example, if you're getting ready to take an examination of some sort, you want that little oomph to give you the motivation to work a little bit harder, but it can go over the top. Our body doesn't know the difference between stress, fear, and anxiety. We have the same physiological responses to all 3. Anxiety, however, is, excuse me, it's the concern that something might happen, and we come up with a what if in our mind and start worrying about it. So it's very future oriented.
With every, like you said, fear, the 3 different things that happen, do they all build into like a fight or flight type thing? Or?
That's exactly what happens. We have the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, our heart rate goes up, we might start feeling palm sweating, a little anxiety in our stomach, or a little butterfly sort of a feeling in our stomach, and they all operate the same way. And so our mind will trick us and say, well, gosh, you know, I feel this feeling when I'm in real danger, and so our mind will tell us that we're in real danger when actually there's no danger present.
Right, and so the adrenaline kicks up or whatever and goes from there.
Exactly.
And we really have a hard time probably running away from that test.
Absolutely.
We have to be there for it, we have to do it. So it can be a positive thing, but it can go past that where it can be harmful.
Right. We actually have a curve called the Yerkes-Dodson law of stress, which tells us that, you know, a moderate amount of anxiety will make our performance better, but if we go over the top into a larger amount of stress or anxiety, that then the performance level goes down. It's that deer in the headlights sort of a feeling.
Right, right. And when that does happen, then you'll see specific things happening to yourself. But probably the biggest part is to be able to pick up on those cues, right, for yourself to understand what's happening.
Well, sometimes they kick you right in the side of the head.
So it's really hard to stay within reason for them.
Right. So what, you know, one of the things that we want to do treatment-wise is to help people differentiate between true fear when there's something that's dangerous in front of them, and anxiety, the what if something dangerous happens. Because what happens is people stop moving forward toward the things that are important to them.
Right.
They might decide to not take the exam, and then they flunk out of the class, and then they say, well, now I really don't want to go back to school because I might have this happen next time an exam comes out.
Right, right.
And so it really acts as a barrier for them to do things that are important to them.
The destructive portion of it can get to the point where if it, I guess there were 3 things we were talking about before with it. If it messes with your social life, with your personal relationships, or with your work.
Right.
Would that be the 3 things that we tie in?
Right. And you can just say, you know, your overall functioning. If it gets in the way of some aspect of your functioning, so either work becomes too difficult for you, your social life becomes too difficult for you, your personal intimate relationships become too difficult for you, that's when you really want to seek help.
I know you were mentioning, we keep on saying about tests and stuff. I just graduated from NIU and Wabansi, thank you. And the test that you had to take and get ready for and prepare for, I had an incident happen where we were studying for this test, and I went on vacation then. When I came back from vacation, I had to do this test. You know, so you're taking these books on vacation, whatever, you get the stuff all done and finished. When I came back, took the test, and all the anxiety was really, it seemed to be even stronger at that point. I don't know why.
Well, sometimes what people like to do with anxious thoughts is to try to forget about them. You know, they have a thought coming up saying, oh my gosh, what if I flunk this test? I'm not going to think about that.
Right.
But what we know is if we try to not think about something, we think about it twice as much.
Right.
If I ask you to think about a yellow truck, and then you get the image of the yellow truck in your mind,
Yep,
and then I
it's
say,
there.
stop thinking about it. You can't stop your mind from thinking about something once it's in your mind.
Right.
And so a lot of times people that are anxious say, I'm not going to think about that. And it really creates a higher level of
You know,
anxiety.
at that point then, when I came back a week later and took the test after being relaxed and everything, but I think you're right, I kept thinking about it, took the test, on my way home, I'd never had this happen before, but the bright lights were really bothering me. I ended up in the emergency room with migraines.
Oh my
I
gosh.
never had a migraine in my life. I never
Wow.
had headaches.
Wow.
And the doc was thinking it was from that tension, total relaxation, back to hardcore tension.
yeah,
that
I
did
could
it.
see that.
And I never had one since. It's just like, but do I have ever a feeling of empathy for people now, understanding what that is?
Yeah.
I mean, it just put me in a fetal position.
Yeah,
It was
it's
just terrible.
dreadfully uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that was probably some kind of anxiety that would built onto that and kept it going.
Right, and so that's how panic can create, because it's that fear of that happening again. And so the next time you go to take a test, that might start coming up for you, where you say, oh my gosh, that was so uncomfortable. What if this happens again? Maybe I better drop out of school.
Right.
And that's when you start getting in trouble, when it gets involved with your functioning.
Or never ever take a vacation again. I don't want to do that. I want to keep doing that.
But that would make perfect sense, that while you're on vacation, you wouldn't want to think about this test. Why would you want to think about a test while you're on vacation? So as the thoughts popped up in your mind, you probably said, ooh, don't think about that, Barry. I don't want to go there. And that would
Very
make sense.
interesting with that. I mean, it's such a prolonged, and I've learned so much with this, but as you know, my past background being a police officer and not understanding this and getting a foundation built up now, and teaching so many of the classes of mental health first aid, learning so much from you and other instructors that came in and talked about it and discussed it, it really gave you an awakening and understanding of what's happening, not just with me, but with family members, with co-workers, with friends, and you have a better understanding of what they're going through, and maybe not to hit it head on with the issues they're having, but how to sort of help them in a roundabout way.
Right.
And some of the things for helping would be what? I mean, we talked about be able to relax, be able to notice there's an issue. I mean, but sometimes you say you can't.
Well, one of the things that we like to help people with is accept the feeling of anxiety. Because, you know, a lot of times people say, I can't have that feeling. It's too uncomfortable. I'm not willing to have it. And it stops them in their tracks. And so if we get people to understand and recognize, you know, what's wrong with that feeling of anxiety? Maybe it's uncomfortable, but isn't it the same feeling that you feel sometimes when you're euphoric, or you go to the gym and you have a great workout?
Right.
It's a heart racing, it's, you know, perspiration. It's your mind telling you that these things are wrong, and there's something that you're not willing to have that actually increase the anxiety.
Right. Interesting. I mean, all the different things you can do with those and try to figure them out. And just in your own head, the first part of recovery is knowing it, right? That's what they're saying. That you got an issue or what's happening with it. And I think to help our co-workers and friends and families and stuff to understand this by taking mental health first aid and getting a basic first aider look at things.
I agree.
I think really is helpful. I tell you, we're going to come back a little bit here and talk a lot more about different things of anxieties, of phobias, and some self-help things and some other issues with it.
All right, terrific.
So stand by, and we'll be back in a little bit and talk a little bit more about this.
Ready. 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 Ready.
It can be a little awkward when your friend tells you he's been diagnosed with a mental illness. But what's even more awkward is, if you're not there for him, he's less likely to recover.
I'm here to help, man, whatever it takes.
It begins innocently enough. You don't return a phone call. You break a date at the last minute. But in fact, it's the beginning of a pattern. And soon, your friend with mental illness realizes you're avoiding them. But what if you knew that your friendship was the key to their recovery? Would you still lock them out of your life?
Big dreams and good grades aren't enough to get into college. There are actual steps you need to take. Finding someone who can help is the first and most important. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.
Welcome back to Mental Health First Aid. We were just talking about anxiety and the different things about anxiety, and it's a big subject. And we have Dr. Joann Wright here talking to us with that. And we were just talking about maybe some signs and symptoms a little bit.
Right.
What are some signs and symptoms of anxiety?
Well, we were saying before, I said it's kind of difficult to tease apart from fear or stress. I think the main difference is recognizing these what-if thoughts. Anxiety is very future-oriented. It's interesting because depression is very past-oriented. It's lamenting or feeling guilty or shameful about things that have happened in the past. Anxiety is very future-oriented. And so it's what if something happens. So I could possibly feel anxious about what if, you know, I mess up here while I'm talking to you and I say something that I regret saying. And if I let my mind get away from that and follow that trail, then I'm out of this present moment.
Is this something that could possibly be instilled as a child or whatever, how you were brought up?
Oh,
or?
absolutely. There are, you know, a few different factors that could come into play. You might have a genetic predisposition to being anxious. There's a possibility that you have an environmental predisposition, and that is that you watched your parents be anxious. I remember one time I was in a restaurant restroom, and a mother was making her 4-year-old daughter wash her hands multiple times. I thought, wow, you know, that's OCD in the making.
Right.
She's really training her up for thinking that this is a necessary way of washing her hands. So there's some environmental factors, but regardless of whether you have a genetic predisposition or an environmental factor, really anxiety is thought-related and thought-based. We really sort of talk ourselves into it. And so some of the treatment of anxiety is having a greater present moment awareness. Because all of this sort of what-if stuff that's going on is really kind of smoke and mirrors. You're trying to predict the future. Oftentimes that trying to predict the future is trying to control the future. Well, if I can predict it, then I can have some control over it and I can problem solve before it happens.
Right.
And so, but you're really missing the only thing that's really happening in your life, and that is this present moment.
Right. So, I mean, we were talking earlier with some other incidences with people. It could be something that, a trigger that set this up with. If a mother has 2 sons that leave the house at the same time, or something like that, and then they have anxiety of taking care of their kids, and now she doesn't have the control.
Right.
And that could be something that would sort of be a trigger?
It's a loss of control. Another thing that might be happening in a case like that would be that, you know, her life was structured around this, and now her structure is going to change dramatically, and she might be worried about what that's going to look like or what that's going to feel like when she has her structure taken away.
Didn't have enough time to do the parenting skills they need to do, and now they're gone, they can't. But you know, that never ends. You're always a parent, and you're always there doing things. We were talking a little bit about seniors, too, where sometimes seniors will get an anxiety built up into them. Is it because of the time, they have idle time now? They're not as busy?
I do think that that's true, and a lot of times in treatment, I'll ask people, because highly anxious people will stay busy a lot, and that staying busy is sort of a way of avoiding dealing with these thoughts that are going on in their mind. So it's, if I stay busy all the time, I don't have to stop and think, and I'll say, what would it be like if you sat still?
So that's not really fixing it. Is it? I mean, you've got to do something to work on it with treatment. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more as we come up.
Yeah.
But they recognize that as a problem, like seniors, that they have a lot of idle time or whatever, and they're anxious, and some stress is building up. Is that a norm for them at that point, or is that an indicator?
Well, absolutely. I think for anyone whose structure changes in their life, whether it's the mother that the 2 boys go away, or the senior citizen that now isn't working as much as they used to anymore, the structure has changed, and I think there's some anxiety that naturally comes up with that, because you don't know what the future is going to look like.
Yeah, I got one for you. I started the job at Linden Oaks after 30 years being a police officer. Getting to Linden Oaks, been there about 8 months. Well, when I was there for the first month or so, it was a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. Well, my boss, Charla, She said, she's a card. She's really a lot of fun and a good friend. And she says, she gives me a present, and I open it up, and it's one of those little rock gardens with a rake and sand.
Oh, yeah. Zen garden.
Yeah, Zen garden. And she goes, here, this will help, you know. And it's just to sort of get more relaxed and understand that this is normal.
And
you can get past
yeah,
this.
the Zen garden is very present moment awareness. It gives you some way of connecting with the here and now.
And I did move the rocks around and did rake it once in a while.
Did you? Okay, yeah. Was that helpful for you?
Yeah, it did. And you know, I think it was more of a reminder to say, hey, don't be stressed.
Yeah.
You're okay with this.
Yeah.
You know, it was an interesting thing to look at, and sort of, it was sort of a joke, but it really did sort of work, too.
Right.
It was sort of interesting.
In the type of treatment that we do, acceptance and commitment therapy, we talk about accepting the feelings of anxiety, though, and accepting that life can be stressful, and life can be messy, and life can be difficult. And we want to have our life on purpose. So we want to be able to move forward, and sometimes the closer we get to the things that are of the most value to us, the more anxiety comes up. Well, that makes intuitive sense, because this goal is so important to me, and here I'm getting closer and closer to it.
Right.
You know, the fears and worries and anxieties about something going terribly wrong, having it taken away from you, the fears about performance, not doing well in whatever task is at hand, start really coming up. So the closer we get to the things that are important to us, sometimes the anxiety really starts rearing its head at those times.
Interesting. That's very interesting to see. With this, are there, you say splinter off, there's a general anxiety disorder, there's, what are some different types?
Well, there's several different types of anxiety. What we see most frequently is generalized anxiety disorder, and that is just, you know, what you would call your worrier. It's someone who kind of worries a little bit about everything. Panic disorder with and without agoraphobia. And panic disorder becomes this sort of dread that you might sort of lose your mind or go crazy. I mean, that's really the thought that goes through people's minds a lot. And it really stops folks from doing things. They're going out in public, that's where you get the agoraphobia, where they're not willing to go out in public any longer. There are specific phobias, but they don't get treated as often as social phobia. Social phobia is one of the biggest anxiety disorders that we treat. We treat generalized anxiety disorder, social phobia, obsessive-compulsive disorder, because obsessive-compulsive disorder is probably the disorder that interferes with functioning more than any of them.
With your work, with your social, with your family.
And PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is also another disorder that can really interfere with functioning.
And that wouldn't necessarily have to be military-based, would it?
No,
You know, some people think that, well, a lot of, and yes, it could be military-based, but it also could be if you're in an accident or
It's trauma-based, yes, absolutely, where you thought that you might die, or a loved one did suddenly die, or you feared for their life.
And what, you know, what we can do about it, and what we can, how we can help, and what triggers your traumatic event may not be anything to me.
Right.
So each person's sort of wired differently of what matters.
What's interesting about acceptance and commitment therapy is it deals with triggers very differently than some of the other forms of therapy.
Very interesting. When we come back, let's talk more about the symptoms and how to help. There's self-help groups, there's lots of different ways to get some help, and we're going to talk about that when we come back. We'll be back in a minute. Thanks.
I remember how much you said you liked wine. Oh.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who would love to put up with you.
Everyone has friends. There's online friends, friends to go out with on a Saturday night, friends to hang out with and do nothing, friends who show up on moving day. And then there are the friends who'll be there if someone is dealing with a mental illness. Are you one of those friends?
Whatever we deny or embrace, for worse or for better, we belong together.
Underneath everything we are, underneath everything we do, we are all people, connected, interdependent, united. And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.
Hi, how are you doing today?
What looks good?
Our special today is shrimp scampi. It's been sitting around for about a week.
Don't you wish there were warnings to protect you from life's risks? With diabetes, there is one. It's called A1C, a simple blood test that helps measure your risk of serious complications. Learn more at diabetesaonc.org.
Welcome back to Mental Health First Aid. We're talking about anxiety, and we have a lot of interesting topics we're bringing up. And anxiety is one of our top ones. In fact, anxiety is one of the biggest mental health issues in the United States. And we have Dr. Joann Wright here talking about them. We were talking a little bit about phobias, and you were locking in some of the main ones, but there can be like spider phobia or height phobia or green chair phobia or whatever, right? It can be anything.
You can have a phobia about anything. Typically, they have to do something with nature, and we don't tend to treat specific phobias in formal professional treatment very frequently because often it does not interfere with daily functioning. For example, I have a fear of alligators and crocodiles, but I can go to work and I have that fear. It doesn't really interfere. I don't love it when they come on television, but you know, it's something that really doesn't interfere. And so spider phobias, fear of heights. Now, if you're a window washer and developed a fear of heights, then you might need treatment. Right.
Yeah, there'd be a problem with that. But it's just interesting because we hear so much about the different phobias, about different things happening with that, and where do they come from, what happens. We discussed that a little bit, you know.
Yeah, I think something that's really interesting is acceptance and commitment therapy uses a theory of language called relational frame theory. And in relational frame theory, we realize that you don't actually have to have something fear-inducing happen to you. Somebody can say something to you that puts it in your head. For example, I've mentioned to you before that, you know, you might love your cat until your cousin comes up and says, you know, cats can scratch your eyes out, right? And now it's put in your head. Or that thought can just be generated from your mind. You do not have to have some specific thing happen. And I think a lot of times therapists are looking for what was the antecedent, what was the trigger, and the trigger might have just been a thought.
Right. Wow. Wow. So, I mean, it's just so complicated sometimes, you know. We're glad you're there to be able to help us out with these things. What can you do? Can you do a self-help, or when do you know that you need help?
I think, you know, starting with self-help, if you're really nipping in the bud, there's a couple of really great books out there that I would recommend. Act for Anxiety by John Forsyth and Georg Eifert, and Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life by Stephen Hayes are really wonderful.
Title.
Isn't that a great title? I think it's one of the best titles ever. But I think those are phenomenal books for self-help. And in fact, some therapists will even use those books in treatment. So, you know, they have their homework assignments from the book between therapy sessions if you're seeing somebody just once a week or so. But they're wonderful. However, if you're really seeing a lot of impact on your functioning, you're not able to go to work, you're not going to weddings or parties because of your social phobia, say, for example, or your OCD is severe enough that it's taking you 3 or 4 or 5 hours to get ready, you definitely want to seek professional help.
What could somebody, a family member or a friend, do to try to help that person see the light? You know what I mean? That they need help with it.
You know, in anxiety disorders, we see this sort of collapse of your life because you start tolerating less and less and less and less, because as the fear grows, you're willing to engage less in life. So, for example, if you have a fear of a car accident, first you might say, well, you know, driving out of state is too much, and then driving on highways is too much, and then driving to the store is too much, and taking the car out of the garage at all is too much. And so this collapse, and so family, friends, co-workers can say, hey, I'm noticing you're doing less and less, and I'm really kind of worried about that.
Good point. You know, with the mental health first aid, it's a 12-hour curriculum, and we talk about these things, how you can be a first aider and how you can help out with this. It's a really neat program, and it sort of hits that same thing what you're talking about. How can you help them listening non-judgmentally,
right,
or the risk of suicide or harm to themselves, that kind of thing, and to look at the different things. That's part of the action plan that we do. And it's just, and part of that is self-help and professional help, and give reinsurance and information, that kind of thing. So the self-help would be the library, the books that you mentioned, that kind of thing. Now, what about the professional help? Would that be, I guess there's a whole array of different...
Well, there's so many different levels of care, from seeing an outside therapist once a week, perhaps, to, partial hospitalizations where you would go to a program that's maybe 6 hours a day, or to an intensive outpatient program to where the program is 4 hours a day.
You'd first probably need a referral or go somewhere to see what level you're at?
Yes, absolutely.
And there's no problem at all. Hey, just some self-help would be able to help you do this, and that could be done too.
For example, at Linden Oaks, we have a resource and referral center that you would go to and be assessed for the level of care, and somebody would help you figure out what you need.
Right, and they would be able to do that, and I guess maybe it would even get the anxiety down a little bit more when they'd say, hey, I think if you read a couple books on this, or you do this or do that, you should be able to get through this. If you can't come back or whatever from that situation.
I think it's always helpful to know that there's something out there that can help you cope with whatever mental health care issue that you're grappling with.
Right. And the professional, like we said, could be a counselor.
Yeah.
Could be the different types of counselors. Could be, I guess the first thing you might want to do is to talk to your primary physician.
One thing that I would warn about with that is, with anxiety disorders, we really like to see people titrate off of medications, and sometimes primary healthcare providers, medication is their first line of defense. Right. And so they might prescribe a Xanax because they're not really terribly aware of the disorders.
Okay, yeah.
And so when we have people come into, for example, our anxiety IOP at Linden Oaks, one of the goals is, let's see if we can get you off of these medications, because what is medication but saying, I'm not willing to feel this anxiety, and so
because
I'm
that's
taking medication.
their tools that they use at that time, and that's the first type of thing they would try to.
So it's sort of an unwillingness to have anxiety. And then the problem with it, that alone would be great. If I could take an occasional Xanax and I don't feel anxiety, that would be wonderful. What happens is that signal anxiety starts creeping up more and more.
And more medication.
More medication. And it's just a vicious cycle.
I know I've heard you speak before at different places, and your whole thing about medication is none. Get off the medication and face the fear.
Face the fear. Yes.
And that fear is heights, or that fear is whatever it being, you need to face that.
You need to face it.
And deal with it. Give me some examples of that. What would you, if it's a fear of height, would you go on a plane with them? Or what would you?
Well, what we do a lot of times in the intensive outpatient program is we send people home on a daily basis with some homework. For example, we had somebody who was fairly agoraphobic, and she wouldn't go into the grocery store. And so we sent her into the grocery store, and the next day she was to bring back her grocery shopping list.
So yeah.
And she talked about it. We hear more times than not, 99.9% of the time, they come back and say the same phrase, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Because they've worked up in their mind that this is going to be terrible and I'm not going to be able to make it through.
Don't talk about it, let's just do it.
Let's do it. Let's just do it.
Very good, very interesting. There are so many different aspects to this, and I know you're in the process of writing a book too.
I am.
Very interesting.
Learning acting groups.
And what we'll do, I think maybe we'll bring you back when you get your book done, and we can discuss that and get some good details with that. But thank you so much for coming on Mental Health First Aid and giving us the first really strong information about anxiety and what we can do about it.
Thank you.
And you're there to help. You're at Linden Oaks and be able to work things out for us, and we appreciate that.
Thank you, Barry.
And thank you very much for being with us today. We hope this gave you some ideas a little bit how to deal with anxiety and just whet your appetite a little bit, and maybe if there is an issue going on, and try to get some help for yourself, or that referral, or talk to your general physician and try to get some help for yourself on this. So thanks a lot for being at Mental Health First Aid, and we will see you next time.